This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Welcome to Permission to Speak, the video blog and podcast that loiters at the intersection of leaders who want their people to speak up, technology that facilitates connections, and results that serve our higher purpose. Now, here's your host, Kelly Vandever.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Vandever, and my special guest today is Susan Basterfield. Susan is the founding partner of Enspiral Labs in Wellington, New Zealand, and she has written a couple dozen articles on Medium and is kind of famous for working out loud. She's an insatiable learner and is obsessed with creating and nurturing relationships and communities to catalyze innovation and collaboration. Now, I met Susan when she replied to a post that I put on the responsive org Slack group, and I asked if I wanted to speak to somebody that was working in a holacracy, and she was quick to reply and agreed to play with us here on the podcast. So she has done she has a fascinating background and is doing some very interesting work with Enspiral Labs. And we'll talk about all that in a minute. But before we get started on that, we want to get to know Susan a little better as a person first. So a couple of quirky questions, and then we'll transition into the regular content. So my first quirky question is, what is your favorite guilty pleasure television show?
Wow. My guilty pleasure television shows are Danish crime drama. So I don't know if in the US you've seen either Forbrydelsen or The Bridge. And you might not know those names, but I understand that both of those have been turned into American TV series. So Forbrydelsen, I think, became The Killing. And The Bridge...
I'm watching The Killing right now. I'm like, so good. It's so
good, right?
Yeah.
So good. And it's quite funny because the quirky sweaters that the lead character wears, that is something that they brought over from the Danish version. So yeah, really good. And the bridge as well, which is about the bridge between Malmö and Copenhagen in Denmark. And I understand that there was a series or two about one of the bridges over the Rio Grande, I think. So kind of similar, but yeah, I really love the Danish sensibility, and I love the movies of Susanne Bier and the Dogma movement, and anything with Mads Mikkelsen in it, obviously, because he's quite gorgeous. So, yeah, that's my guilty pleasure from a TV point of view.
Very good, very good. So it sounds like viewing is a little different maybe in New Zealand than in the US.
Well, we've only just got Netflix, so Netflix arrived like 4 months ago. So yeah, it's a little bit different.
Okay. Well, we have those to look forward to or maybe I just need to be exposed to some of those. So very cool. Do you watch them in Danish?
Yeah, with subtitles? Yes.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, I am half Swedish. Obviously, the half that's not tall and blonde. But I don't speak Danish or Swedish, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. Well, then the second quirky question is, tell us something surprising about yourself that most people don't know.
So most people don't know that I was the first woman to bungee jump off the highest suspension bridge in the world. It's not the highest suspension bridge in the world anymore, but the Royal Gorge Bridge in Colorado is, I think, 1,064 feet tall. And so I was the first woman to ever jump off of that bridge. Not many people know that about me.
That is very cool. Girl power.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Very cool. What possessed you to want to bungee jump in the first place?
So I, although most of my career has been spent up until 2 years ago in senior leadership in big multinationals, I did have a couple of career breaks. One, I went back and did my postgrad in secondary teaching and learning, and was head teacher for a high school for at-risk youth. And the other career break I did was a role as managing director for AJ Hackett Bungee's international business. So Cairns, Bali, Macau, KL, Acapulco, Las Vegas, Normandy in France. And yeah, we had the opportunity to participate or be one of the partners in the Go Fast games back in 2006, I think, and so I had the opportunity to do that then. But I've jumped off the GoldenEye Bridge in Italy and out of helicopters, and probably about 500 times altogether.
Holy cow. Oh my
Oh.
gosh. That is not something I want to do, but I respect that you have done that.
Well, I never want to go into a cave, so yeah, I'm right in there.
Very cool, very cool. All righty. Well, for our transitional question, when was the first time that you really got how important changing the way people work was? How was it, and how have you seen these changes make a difference in the lives of people?
So as I said, I spent nearly 25 years in multinationals, and before between my first gig in a multinational and my last sort of three or four, I had the opportunity to work in a startup in the first dot-com boom. This organization in the UK called Vystorm, which was eventually purchased by EDS and later by HP, and is now the cornerstone of HP's security practice, was a company that had fantastic leadership. The CEO and the COO focused just as much on the development of the people and the opportunities that could be brought to bear if we paid attention to how we were with each other as a direct impact on the way that we were with our customers and hence our ability to build a market and build a business. So very early on in my career, I had the great pleasure and guidance of a full-time organizational psychologist who really unlocked, I think, what is something that is probably quite common, especially in female executives, where we think that we have to work doubly hard and be great at everything. Some of the practices that we did in that organization liberated me to recognize something that is now quite common, is that I know what my strengths are and what brings me joy. And because interpreting the spreadsheet brings me joy, but creating the spreadsheet doesn't. But how wonderful it is that creating the spreadsheet brings Kelly joy. Why should I, number one, stress and angst over something that doesn't that doesn't make me feel great, and take the opportunity away from Kelly, who clearly derives pleasure and a sense of accomplishment from doing this. So that little hook was really important for me. And as I brought myself through to IBM and Telstra and some of the other organizations, I became what I think is now called an intrapreneur. So always within my sphere of influence, whatever the narrow silo or broad silo, really being able to enable the teams that I worked with to think outside the traditional square in terms of how we would achieve our KPIs and goals, how to really learn to create that safe space where everybody could bring more than just their narrow, rational, masculine perspective to the problem, and that we could really start to blur the lines between what was sort of traditionally acceptable in an organization and what it could look like if we were bringing our creative selves and our artistic selves and our funny selves to a problem. So the opportunities that I had in big organizations to do that were like sort of fundamental guides to not only how I found my place and my purpose in the world, but like literally being able to see what a difference it made to the people that were working in these groups. And what was unleashed when myself as a leader found a way to subvert my ego or my need for control by recognizing that this group is going to do far better if we can actually listen to each other. And look, at the end of the day, the buck kind of stops with me, but if I can be open to influence and feedback and advice, the whole group's going to be far better off.
Yeah.
But what I found was happening in those organizations inevitably was that this intention starts to bump up against the hierarchy that's unshiftable and unmovable. And so finally I took the decision about 2.5 years ago that the corporate multinational world was not where my joy was best served or where I thought that I could make the biggest impact.
Okay, so this first organization had that kind of environment, but did you still have kind of that ceiling there, or was it just as you went to other organizations that the issues?
When I went to other organizations, I left this company just at the pivotal point where they were being acquired, because I got it in my mind, my husband and I got it in our minds that we wanted to emigrate to New Zealand.
Very cool, very cool. So, what was? Do you think was it just the founders of that first organization that were enlightened, or was it maybe because it was an international type of organization as opposed to an American based? I know you originally are from the U.S. but have been overseas. What do you know where that enlightenment came from?
I mean, it wasn't an international organization initially. It was a homogenous English organization. But I think that the Enlightenment did come from this combination of the CEO being incredibly non-precious, and also from a COO who had read philosophy at Oxford and done his MBA at Harvard. And I think just having that broader perspective from both of those angles just brought a sense of possibility and experimentation that allowed us to do things differently. And I think that again is another really core factor is having this predisposition to treating work as experiments rather than having fixed rigid strategies. And this is, I think, why we're both attracted to the responsive org way of working, is that in an environment that is changing, not only changing every day, but in an environment where we're recognizing the sort of ongoing evolution of what we're doing, rigidity is not something that serves us.
Exactly. All right. So you worked in that organization, then went to other companies, large organizations. But what happened a couple of years ago? Tell us what you're doing now, and help folks understand this new change that has come about for you.
So I was working with one of the largest multinationals in the world, and so I had been head of enterprise and government at Telstra here in New Zealand, and Vodafone acquired the business, and I decided I didn't want to jump on the Vodafone bus. So this other organization, who I'd like not to name, actually headhunted me, and Susan, you're exactly what we need. We really want to shift our focus to the customer. You've got such a great track record of doing this. Your relationships are legendary in Wellington, and we basically do anything to have you. And at that point, I allowed my ego to say yes when my heart was saying no. Because this is an organization that is legendary for their hierarchy, is legendary for their operational focus, and legendary as an organization from whom about 70 to 80% of the employees have been there for their entire career. So there were a lot of things that should have been pinging for me in terms of, But what inevitably happens with me coming in is, for the first 6 months, people get really excited. The exec get really excited because I'm like this breath of fresh air, noticing things that had been unnamed, and really challenging some of the status quo and getting my quick early wins in. But over time, that starts to push against the expectations of the hierarchy, and the sense of, whoa, I might have to change. And then the fear kicks in, and the shutting down kicks in. And so that happened one too many times. So finally, after that experience, I decided the organization has broken my heart one too many times. Yeah. I'm sure many of us have experienced this, right? Where we've put our heart and soul into something that feels right. And I don't care. I'm going to keep trying because our customers are responding, or this group in the organization are responding. But because it doesn't fit into the nice box of what the shareholders or London or Berlin or New York want, this isn't welcome. And we can't let it grow. So we're going to find a way to at least contain it or kill it.
Yeah. So where did you transition there, and how did you end up at InSpiral, and
Yeah.
tell us that story?
Yeah. So my first little gambit was okay. So I'm going to go contracting. So I'm gonna still do like my the work that I've been doing around market making and go contracting. But I found that the organizations that I was contracting for would be smaller, but would be normally run by an entrepreneur who was every bit as controlling and egotistical as what I'd left in corporate. And yeah, so I found quickly that that's not what I wanted to do either. And I guess the thing that really was the most transformatory for me is in September of last year, I did Seth Godin's altMBA. Are you familiar with this?
No,
Yeah.
not until I saw it on your profile. Yeah.
Yes. So he's done an amazing job of curating a program that is built around a 5 weeks of sprints. So you're working with a cohort of about 120 people from all around the world, kind of nominally organized around time zones in groups of 20. And every week you're given a project or two to complete with a new group of 4 or 5 out of that 20. So using technology and coming to the opportunity from a basis of high trust and I guess a little bit of sort of social pressure to do well for each other, amazing opportunity to see what can manifest really quickly with a group of strangers working towards a common purpose. So that kind of not only gave me confidence with a lot of these technical tools, gave me confidence with my voice as a writer, and gave me a lot of confidence that given the right container and the right environment, pretty much anybody with the right frame of heart and mind can come together and create greatness pretty immediately. So that kind of shifted my thinking. And, started to do like general freelance stuff and getting a bit of coaching and facilitating work here and there. And I was talking to a great friend of mine in the US called Doug Kirkpatrick, who it was one of the founding members of the Self-Management Institute at Morningstar. I don't know if you're familiar or if anybody listening has read Frederick Laloux's book, Reinventing Organizations. But Morningstar is a tomato processing plant, and pretty much I think something like 80% of all the tomato products in America have passed through that plant. But Morningstar is 100% self-managing. So if you're interested in that, as a theory and practice, please do look into them. Anyway, Doug has been a great friend and mentor of mine. And he said, Susan, you're in New Zealand and Spiral's in New Zealand. They're doing great stuff. You're doing great stuff. Why aren't you talking to them? And it sort of pinged back in my mind that I'd known of them since about the beginning of their existence in 2011. In Wellington, they had become famous because they were a co-working space, but it wasn't just nerdy geeks with their headphones on renting desks and coding. They were actually coming together with social impulses and creating companies. So I thought that was super cool that it wasn't just coders, it was lawyers and accountants and designers all coming together in a place where they were starting to do value share with one another, just on the basis of actually being in proximity of one another. And I thought that's like super cool. And about a year before, InSpiral had actually run the first and only job advertisement that they've ever run, because InSpiral doesn't have jobs, and I'll describe this later, for something called a foundation catalyst. So, and I read this job description and I thought, wow, this sounds just like me, somebody that wants to work in an open, collaborative, non-hierarchical organization that has the business nous and expertise from an operations point of view and a strategic point of view to do the work of the foundation. And I'm reading this and it's like, oh my gosh, this is totally me. But the still small sense in me that had been wounded said, they're never going to want me. What are they going to want with a middle-aged corporate refugee, right? So I didn't reply to the ad. And it wasn't until about a year later with this conversation with Doug that I sent an email to info@inspiral.com, got a coffee meeting with an amazing guy called Rich Bartlett, one of the founders of Loomio, who I hope you will talk to at some point, and started having the conversations. And over the course of about maybe 10 coffees and 5 lunches, I sort of started to get my head around what this thing is. And the final sort of tipping point for me was InSpiral. Is one of the important cultural tools of InSpiral is they run retreats twice a year. So the summer retreat in January, remember we're in the other side of the world.
Right.
I was invited to go along to that, and it's open for families as well. So I said to my beloved husband, Colin, I said, would you please come with me just to make sure this isn't a cult and that I'm not getting myself into something weird? And so he said, yeah. So we went to a beautiful beach for a weekend with these amazing people and co-created wonderful food and had a lot of open space, and came away from that thinking, this is where I can see standing and committing to work with these other amazing humans who are not doing the exact same thing as I am, but are committed to the fundamentals of open source, no IP, collaboration, participation, distributed decision making, no hierarchy, and no coercion. I mean, how cool is that? And there's 250 of us all around the world, which is even better. So that's how I landed at InSpiral.
So, okay, help make it tangible for us. So what does something look like inside of InSpiral? We think of companies and we have a product or a service and we have clients and we go do things. So compare that with something that we could understand from an InSpiral. What does it look like?
Yeah. Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, InSpiral does not employ anybody. InSpiral is the foundation, and InSpiral as the foundation is held by 40 members, each with one share in the foundation, and it's a non-financial share. It's a voting share only. In addition to the 40 members, there are 250 contributors. And a contributor is basically an individual who resonates with the idea of an organization that can help make connections, meaning share work, share ideas, generate thinking, and do value exchange in a way that designs for high trust and assumes the best for one another. Okay, so I know this is still sounding woolly, so stick with me here. There are also 17 companies that are InSpiral Ventures. So what's happened over the past 5 or 6 years is that these individual members and contributors have come together, found each other, and started companies. So the companies are everything from Loomio, which is amazing decision-making software, to Rabid, which is a traditional web design agency, to Lifehack, which is a joint venture between the New Zealand government and an organization focused on better mental health outcomes for youth, to Orientation Aotearoa, which is a gateway program between school and university as an immersive study program, to Action Station, which is New Zealand's biggest direct action advocacy group, to Scoop, which is New Zealand's only independent press agency, to more normal organizations like InSpiral Accounting, so an organization that does accounting services around the country, but really focuses on organizations that want to have a social impact. So this is an example of the companies that have formed. Now, Enspiral Labs is the latest of those organizations. So what we've seen happening over the last couple of years is that the organizing principles of InSpiral have become very attractive to other networks around the world, and they're interested in learning from us and seeing what combination of technical, cultural tools, agreement practice, decision making has InSpiral implemented that could help serve them. So InSpiral Labs was really created in service to the commons. So providing workshops and facilitation and training around these new ways of organizing, as well as developing software and solutions to help organizations become more collaborative. And I'll give you one example of that is a product called Co-Budget. So what we found in InSpiral was, again, because we don't have any money, the way that we're funded is completely voluntary. So the companies will make a contribution, and that could be a fixed amount every month. That could be an amount based on their revenue or their turnover, whatever metric that might be. Every contributor contributes a nominal sum of $100 per year to the foundation. But what that actually goes for is quite interesting. So of the $100 that you contribute annually, $50 of that goes to foundation running costs, like the software and the compliance stuff. But $50 of it goes into what's called your co-budget account. So that is $50 that remains completely in your control to spend on things that are most important to you. This came from the idea that in an organization where there is not a CFO and not a budget for capital expense over the year, things will come up which really could use our attention. And in the early days, those were just raised as budget lines that the members kind of voted on, what can we afford to fund this month. But what co-budget allows is anybody to raise a budget line for anything from, I've got a new client and I want to do a lean canvas workshop for them, and I would like to raise some money to produce some collateral, to we need to redesign our new website, to we want to fund some thinking into a project that we'd like to pitch to the New Zealand government. Those then are raised as co-budget opportunities, and then you, Kelly, with your $50, can decide where you want that money to go. So one of those might resonate really strongly and you give it all of your $50. You might want to divide it up. You might want to save it up for something that resonates more. But in this way, everybody in the network is able to get funding for impact projects that are important to them. And everybody in the network has the opportunity to fund those impact projects that most resonate with them. So those are some tangible examples of what the network does and what we're there for. I'll stop.
Well, and not so that folks don't think it's so too loosey-goosey. You have quite a structured framework that you've placed around InSpiral and how things work there. Would you mind sharing some about that?
No, not at all. But I have anathema to the word framework, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
So So metaphorically, right? A frame, when you frame a house and you put the bricks and mortar and drywall and paint it, the only way you can change it is by knocking the whole thing down. We really prefer the phrase scaffold. So
Nice.
we are the tenders of the scaffold, because what's in the middle is only going to emerge exactly how it needs to, depending on who's actually working on it. So Kelly, you and I have the job of handing out the tools. So today we might be using hammers. Tomorrow we might be using saws. We might need some paintbrushes here and there, or a chisel. Or my job might just be to make the cups of tea. But really, because this gooey amorphous thing in InSpiral is constantly changing and evolving, and is only what it is based on who's around at the moment. The sense of having a rigid framework doesn't kind of work for us metaphorically. But the things that are really important from a scaffolding perspective are looking at tools or technology that reflects the culture, not the other way around. So there are some examples of this, and Loomio is a great example of this. So it's all well and good to sit around in a circle of 250 and try to make a decision together, right? but you're always going to run into the basic human fallibilities that we have. Even if you're sitting around in a circle of 10 people, one or two people are going to have the loudest voices. Another couple of people are going to be like super introverted thinkers who really do not feel comfortable at all until they've gone away and processed things for a couple of days. So how can we create a technology that actually recognizes everything we've recognized culturally about ourselves, that can still bring the outcome that we're after? And so Loomio as a tool for divergence, discourse, convergence, proposal raising, and getting agreements done, is one of the really lovely manifestations of the thinking around tools reflecting culture. Another example of this is our most recent agreement. So Handbook.InSpiral is the place where you can sort of see how we actually organize this thing and run this thing. Another really good example is our latest agreement, which is the stewardship agreement. And I talked a little bit earlier about the importance of retreats. So once a year, we all go away on retreat together. That is just like spending time together and kind of sensing into our collective intentions for the next period. But in our winter retreats, we normally go away and focus on a particular topic. So this winter we went away around the topic of stewardship, and mainly influenced by the work of Peter Block, who wrote a great book called Stewardship, and trying to understand when we're in an environment where there is no hierarchy, how do we glean the benefits that we know come from one-on-one relationships that are not coercive or hierarchical, like mentoring relationships and coaching relationships really are. What if we could really figure out a way to come and support each other adult to adult, and not parent to child, or some manifestation of that like emerges quite frequently. So we went away for a weekend to a beautiful place, which isn't hard to find in New Zealand. And what came out of that was the idea that some of what we'd been noticing in InSpiral as it grows, obviously I can't have one-on-one relationships with 250 people. And what starts happening when you get this amount of people that are becoming distributed around the world, we start making assumptions about how everybody is, right? And people started falling through the cracks. People that had been really important in the network were stepping away because they didn't feel like they were getting the support they need. So we thought, how can we do an intentional intervention that is reflecting, again, what we're seeing in our culture? And we came up with the idea of stewardship. So everybody in the members organization is a steward and stewards. So that's like an example of how we are caring for each other, again, in a company that doesn't have an HR department. Right?
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And so another great example of this that I'd like to share is how do we actually get the work done? Yeah. How do we get the work of the network done? Because there's a lot of work to be done. I think that at last count there were 250 improvements that the network has put up as possible things to be looked at or worked on. Now, what happened in the early days was, because it was so loosey-goosey, as you say, the people that were doing that work because they had the time and inclination to do that work, but they weren't being recognized for it. And there's a lovely piece by an individual called Joe Freeman called The Tyranny of Structurelessness. This was written, I think, in about 1970 on the back of something that was happening in the organized women's movement, where in this collective where equality and consensus was so valued, that naming of leadership or power was so frowned upon that it wasn't happening. And instead what was happening were these toxic manifestations of unnamed power and leadership, like I'm describing happened in InSpiral. So people with the most context were doing the work, and they were getting burned out because they weren't getting recognized, but they were getting blamed because they had the most social capital, and all of these weird manifestations of power that happens around the people that are actually interested in doing that type of work, that are unfair not only to the individual but also to the collective. So how do you start thinking about really valuing those individuals who have the heart and derive joy from doing the work of the organization? And so what spawned from that is this concept of catalysts. So currently InSpiral has 4 foundation catalysts. I'm one. Joshua Weil, who is the actual founder but now calls himself the ex-founder and has stepped away from the board as well, is also a catalyst. Rich Bartlett from Loomio and Andre Bate, we are the 4 foundation catalysts. And we are equivalent to 1 full-time employee, and our role is to actually do the work of the foundation. So for example, things like, oh gosh, where do I even start? Like the sense that we need a conflict resolution process. How do we create the opportunity for the right person to step in to lead that project? How do we tick off the things that are just like admin work stuff that need to be done? How do we create the opportunities for working groups to manifest? Because InSpiral doesn't have jobs and doesn't have bosses, that work still needs to get done. But we do it in a way that's completely transparent. We don't choose the work that we do. The contributors tell us what needs to be done. We sense into what that work needs to be done. We work in 2-week strict sprints. So every other Monday we do our sprint planning. We commit to what we're going to do over the next 2 weeks. And on every other Friday, we actually create a YouTube video which shows the entire network what we've done over the past 2 weeks. And I mean, gosh, how cool would it be, right? If leadership teams all over the world were actually delivering something tangible to the workforce every 2 weeks and sharing that transparently.
Well, that kind of leads me into the question. A lot of folks that listen to this are leaders or in management kind of roles. So they're not living in an organization that's kind of self-organizing and creating companies. But I'm guessing that there are lessons that you guys have that these leaders that are listening can do something with, that there are some ideas that would translate into a more traditional organization.
Absolutely. And so the first thing that I'd like to offer, now we haven't talked about holacracy at all yet. So InSpiral do not operate as a strict holacracy. but there are many elements of the holacratic practice and the holacracy, sociocracy, these practices around inclusive decision making and organizing in a way that's transparent are provide some really useful tools. We tend to try to be non-dogmatic in terms of which elements we pull off of, because again, back to the scaffold, we pull the bits and pieces and the tools that we need from everywhere, as the in direct response to what the culture is asking for. But one thing that holacracy I think does really well is the concept of roles instead of job titles. So here's something that leaders can consider taking away to your team as an experiment. So normally when you get a job, you get your contract to sign and you get a job description. And the job description, in my experience, is probably 5 or 6 years old. HR has kind of dusted it off, maybe made a few changes. There's probably still a few typos in there, but you may or may not read it, but it probably gets stuck in your drawer with your contract and you never look at it again. So the invitation is, why don't you actually write down what you do? What are you accountable for? I'm Susan. I'm accountable for this, this, and this, and I want to be held account, and this is how I want to be held to account. You're instantly getting this flip of ownership, right? If I'm writing down and articulating what I'm standing for and what I'm accountable for, it's way different than a piece of dusty paper that's telling me what I need to be doing. So first of all, you'll probably find that there's not much resemblance between this job description and what you're actually doing and standing for. But if you do this across your team and start comparing things, you might find some interesting stuff like, oh, Kelly, I thought that you did that. And Peter over here saying, no, that's what I do. Well, if we get out the job, oh, okay, that's great. You'll start to see overlaps. You'll start to see gaps. And then collectively as a team, you can sense into, okay, right. So I see that there's a little hole here. I've got energy for that. What if I kind of took accountability for that? What could that look like? And then all of a sudden, you're starting to not be accountable to a boss. You're starting to be accountable to the work as a team.
Nice.
So that's always sort of my top tip for where to start as an experiment, because it's non-threatening. It's not like asking everybody to write down their purpose. I mean, how threatening can that be? But yeah, that's. I think that you could get there eventually, but that's probably not the place to start. It's a really nice way to sense into and really have some, clear, unambiguous understanding of one another. It's a really nice place to start.
So so that makes perfect sense. I love what you said there. If I'm looking at what you guys are doing as InSpiral, it sounds like you're kind of looking at what's going on maybe around you, the organizations, the businesses, and saying there's a need here. And we see that we have the skills and talent and the energy and the desire to go do that. Is that how it works? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. So for example, the work that I actually do is facilitation and coaching for CEOs, founders, and teams that want to start experimenting with more participation in the organization. And that might be something very simple like a workshop using liberating structures, which is also one of my top tips, liberatingstructures.com, totally open source, about 33 microstructures that you can start using today that don't require any accreditation or special training, that can actually harness the collective intelligence. Go LS. running a workshop for a big team around how that might start to give everybody the opportunity to have a relatively equal voice in a hierarchical organization, to another committed client that I have actually in India, who are a self-managing paper manufacturing plant, who their self-management journey began in a really interesting way. About 20 years ago, there was intercommunal violence in the province where they are, so not everybody could get to the factory. So those that could get to the factory had to throw sort of the standard operating procedure rule book out the window and organize themselves. And the realization from the exec when they came back that, gosh, these guys on the shop floor know better than us, and the production that they've been able to achieve without us telling them what to do or breathing over their necks has been amazing. And they've managed to sort of hold that spirit within that organization for the last 20 years. And the spirit of innovation as well. And I love talking about this organization because they have got a big mission to rid India of styrofoam by the year 2025. They have a compostable tableware product made of sugarcane waste that you throw on your compost heap and composts in 2 weeks. So, yeah,
Very cool.
but I'm helping them. In the most hierarchical country in the world, InSpiral is helping them sense into. It's not going to be practical everywhere, but where can we help these teams or these songs? That's the Indian word for it, be more, have this combination of autonomy, agency, and connectedness to where they are actually harnessing the collective intelligence on the shop floor to do what's best for the customer. That's an example. Another example, just recently, big government agency in Australia currently have a distributed network of what I call 13 pyramids. So, with the regional manager on top and going down like this. And, the provocation there is, what if the job changes from regional manager to regional coach? What could that look like then? And how might that pyramid start to become more like this?
So these organizations have they heard about InSpiral and come to you seeking, like, we want to get more like this? Is that?
So there's a burgeoning sort of community of practice around the world around responsive work and around reinventing organizations and around new ways of working. And it's funny because new ways of working or the workplace of the future is often confused. Workplace of the future to some is all about AI and, what that could look like. For us, workplaces of the future is, in the constant quest for the acquisition and retention of great talent, table stakes aren't enough anymore. So the table stakes of a pool table in the break room and maybe beers on a Friday are not enough anymore. The individuals coming into the workforce now are going to be demanding, and rightfully so, that the organizations that they join are committed to their ongoing cognitive, personal, and professional development, and are going to have to prove this in a way that goes beyond the old traditional learning and development portfolio that is focused on competencies rather than holistic growth. So deliberate developmental organizations are really, I feel, going to be the ones with the competitive advantage moving forward. That's a whole topic for a different day, but it's like I feel like the environment is really ripe now. Now, you asked earlier, is it down to having an enlightened CEO? And as much as I'd like to believe that that's not true, it really is. Yeah. If the CE or the president is still stuck in the hierarchical paradigm, it's never going to work. No matter how big the groundswell is, things are never going to change. But I have tremendous hope. I spoke at at an executive circle meeting this week with 12 executives from all different types of industries in New Zealand, and one of the gentlemen was sharing his story in provocation from me, and it became clear to me that he's already doing this. And he's like he's a farmer, right? This grizzly old guy in a sweatshirt is already doing it, and he doesn't even realize what he's doing. It's just what's obvious to him. Like, I'm creating a team. That doesn't mean that I can create this great organization and rest on my laurels and take all the money. No, I want to create an environment and a culture where everybody has a say and everybody can participate. And that really heartened me, because he wouldn't be the type of individual that would be on the internet seeking out a community of practice around new ways of working. It's just something that he's doing. So I'm like really curious about the question, is our job as thought leaders now to listen out for these individuals in these companies that are really doing great stuff as examples for the rest of us.
Beautiful. Okay. I could talk about this stuff all day. I think I, I genuinely could. Okay, so is so do leaders emerge from Spiral? Do people take on leadership roles as they identify something that they're passionate about, or that they think that there's a need for? Does that come out still, even though there's not a boss?
That's absolutely it. It's all self-selecting. And I'm trying not to get woo-woo here, but there's not another word to describe it. The container is there for you to follow your energy. So, for example, I was talking about this need for a conflict resolution working group. Somebody from Christchurch, who's not really particularly that actively involved, saw that improvement card come up, and she's like, yes, this is what I want to do. I'm going to step in and lead this. So that's what we're trying to encourage, is follow your energy, follow your joy, and either create something that is meaningful for you, or step into the opportunities when you see them to express your leadership.
Very cool. I wonder what would happen in America, well, corporate world, if more people were given that kind of a scaffolding to work around. Fascinating.
What do you think would happen?
I don't know. I was talking to a colleague yesterday who is in a leadership role in a training organization, and they are in an industry that is being very disrupted right now. And so they're talking about the competencies, going back to that they want to encourage in the organization around innovation and such. And I'm like, how does a person get a voice and innovate in an organization of that massive size? And this is a huge organization, and I just don't know. What if there's some guy a couple levels from the bottom that's got an innovative idea? How does he ever get, or she ever get that idea, get some traction? Or how do they have the entrepreneurial kind of a scaffolding somewhere in the organization that somebody can do something with that? I just don't have the confidence that they do. I don't know, but yeah. So do you have it figured out? Can you?
Well, in my experience as an entrepreneur, as I described before, I was that lonely voice that held the brown bag lunches and invited people cross-functionally to come with their ideas. And maybe that's part of it as well. Maybe part of our ringing the bell is to bring out those entrepreneurs within organizations that have the courage to actually do that.
Yeah, very good. Now, I did notice that you have written a lot about teal, and I'm not familiar at all with that. I kind of looked it up a little bit, but could you explain what that is, and is that related to what we've been talking about?
Yeah, it definitely is. And I mean, really shy away from dogma. So take this for what it is. So um, Frederick Laloux, who is a brilliant guy, wrote a book a couple of years ago called Reinventing Organizations, which I recommend highly anybody read. There's two versions. So there's like the dense, like textbook version, and there's a more recent illustrated version. So depending on where you're at, read it. So conceptually, the idea is that as humans have evolved in the way that we are in communities and civilization, different opportunities have manifest. So if we think back to tribal days where there was a tribal chieftain and we were worried about feeding ourselves, and the mentality was that of, kill or be killed, like the metaphor of like the wolf pack. Sort of that's how people were organized back in those times. Then the next kind of frame is what we call amber organizations, which is when this kind of tribal mentality became distributed and replicable. So you can think of armies or militaries or the church, replicable, solid hierarchical models that were there to kind of control and hold and keep safe individuals. The next level is the orange paradigm, which was manifest from the Industrial Revolution, which is probably where most organizations sit today. So the concept of the machine. So we're cogs in a machine, and we're cogs, and the way that we're organized can make us more efficient or more productive, but we're eminently replaceable. But there is still that concept of innovation and a bit of meritocracy in there, but it is still very sort of a top-down hierarchical pyramid. Then what sort of started to emerge in the 60s and 70s with the more communal ideas of consensus and equality, and what I was describing earlier in light of the women's movement, where the emphasis was on like the expanded family, but still that has some hierarchical over and undertones that are more, I guess, reflected in like a parent-child relationship, where the benevolent leader kind of looking after all of the children in that kind of way. And what Frederick did is he used to be consultant at McKinsey. But what he started noticing around the world were these organizations, I think much like I was saying earlier, that had kind of transcended all of these paradigms and were working in a way that sort of valued autonomy, agency, and connectedness in a way that was more based on individuals being accountable, having the decision-making distributed to those that had the accountabilities, but still building in both reflective practices and feedback loops. And one of those that's probably easiest to explain is the advice process. So I'll give you an example of Favi, who are an auto parts manufacturer in France that Frederick, just discovered out of the blue, have been operating this way, that they don't have a capital budget. But if somebody on the shop floor does some research and finds a lathe that will kind of improve the quality of the product to the customer and could be really beneficial to the organization, as long as he or she undergoes the advice process, which is getting feedback and advice from the people who will be impacted by that decision, this person on the shop floor has the authorization to write a purchase order for $1 million machine.
Wow.
So that's one example. Another great example that I like to use that Frederick pulls out is curated in his book is the example of buurtzorg in the Netherlands. So home healthcare in the Netherlands, community healthcare has been something that's always been there. But in the sort of 90s and early 2000s, again, from that sort of orange paradigm of efficiency, the nurses were really feeling like they were compromising not only their well-being, but the well-being of their patients and the patients' families, because they knew that if they had to take a blood pressure, that took 2 minutes, do an injection, that was a minute. Everything was kind of time and motion surveyed down to like exactly what they needed to do to see this number of patients over the day, and outcomes were miserable. Patients were miserable. The nurses were miserable. So nurses, Jos de Blok was a nurse, and he decided with some other nurses to self-organize into a different way of caring for the community, which was actually based on the relationships and the families, and spending as much time as they needed to with the family and the individual. The outcomes were better. Everybody was happier. And today, Buurtzorg has about 9,700 staff, nurses in the Netherlands, all in self-organizing teams of about 12 that run their own ship. So there's no hierarchy.
Very cool. Very cool. So it sounds like we could go on and on with this. But if there were one or two other tips that you might give to that leader that's still in the hierarchy, but to try to implement a few more things, what initial suggestions might you suggest they experiment with?
So I think the most important thing is deciding how you want to make decisions. So deciding how you want to make decisions, either if you're a smaller company or if you're a manager within a bigger organization, take a look at the decisions that you make over the course of the week, and really consider which of those decisions you need to take on your own, or which of those decisions you can either delegate, or which of those decisions you could take advice on, or which of those decisions you could maybe put out to the whole group. Because one thing's for sure, that when we talk about employee engagement, till we're sick to the back teeth because it's not working, right? And I fundamentally believe that it's because individuals don't feel like they really truly have a say in decisions that impact their work.
Right.
I don't think that it's that difficult to let go of some of that in a way that's actually really practical. So take a look at the way you make decisions and see what you can play with and experiment with in distributing some of that decision making. Do that exercise around roles instead of job titles, and see what it could look like. Maybe take a look for performance reviews next quarter. Maybe instead of the line manager doing the performance reviews, why don't you do performance reviews with 3 individuals that are peers are reviewing each other?
Very fascinating. Yeah, love it.
Three tips. 3 tips to get started, and then like from there's a cascade of understanding what the values are and the culture is, and implementing the tools and the processes that actually reflect that culture, rather than trying to fit your culture into a tool.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, before we sign off, my final question to you is, in this couple of years where you've been involved with InSpiral and this new way of working, what have been one or two of your most pleasant surprises around this?
Like, my biggest joy comes from like being in a public workshop talking about this stuff, and just seeing the sense of relief coming over somebody's face, like, oh my God, I'm not crazy. I don't have to be the mad one rocking in the corner drooling anymore, because everything that I've sensed about what is possible, people are starting to do. And what a gift and a relief it is to know that there is a different way and that it is possible. It's really, really, really hard, but it's possible. So that would be the kind of biggest wonderful surprise. I think the other surprise, to be quite honest about it, is that, Kelly, you and I might be thinking about this, and we think that because we're thinking about it, everybody else is. everybody else isn't.
Mm.
So I think that that's sometimes a hard reality, and I think also another reflection of something that's been sort of resonant for most of us over the last little while with the global psychosocial drama that's unfolded in 2016, about the recognition that we're in bubbles, and we bubblify our life with people who reflect our thinking, and we live a life of confirmation bias. And until we can find a way to be brave enough and courageous enough to step outside those and find those empathy hooks and have conversations with those that don't sit within our bubble, then the rate of change and the rate of people even being introduced to these possibilities is significantly diminished.
Well, good advice. Get outside of those bubbles for sure. Susan, is there anything else that you wish I'd asked, or anything else you'd like to share with the audience that's listening?
Well, I'm always conscious that I'm not as eloquent as I'd like to be, and I think that that's also, I'm just going to make a little excuse here, that this stuff is really complex, and it's really difficult to explain it and do it any justice by talking about it. So the best way to learn it is to start experimenting yourself. And I think that I'm just really so privileged for the opportunity to explore with you and share with your audience, Kelly. And if anybody's interested, find me on Medium, Susan@Enspiral.com, and I'd love to have conversation. And just really, Kelly, just so pleased and so grateful and appreciative for what you're doing, and just keep doing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you so much. And I thought you were tons of eloquence, so thank you so much, Susan. This podcast was brought to you by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com. Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com, or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.